Timber has been an integral part of America's story since the first European settlers arrived in Jamestown in 1607. Folk heroes like Paul Bunyan represent the strength, vitality, and power that the lumber industry brought to the United States. Lumber had become one of the most important resources during the 18th and 19th century, as timber built America's ships, homes, railroads, and eventually fueled the Industrial Revolution. As East Coast lumber giants like Maine and New England depleted their supply of timber, Americans began to head west in search of new forests for a chance to score an enormous fortune. One such area that hopeful pioneers sought is a place called Menominee, Wisconsin.
The impetus for coming to this space was that Captain William Wilson really thought that this was the spot for a booming lumber industry. The area itself was so attractive because of the massive white pine trees. It was gold to them. They'd looked out and didn't necessarily see a gorgeous, pristine wilderness to be preserved, but they saw a lot of money to be made.
Between 1871 and 1896, Menominee's Knapp and Stout Lumber Company sent an average of 85 million board feet of lumber down the Red Cedar, Chippewa, and Mississippi rivers to St. Louis. By the end of the 19th century, Wisconsin's pinery was nearly wiped out, so the Knapp and Stout Company sold off nearly 275,000 acres of land and shifted their focus to Arkansas and Missouri's forests. Though the lumber industry brought prosperity to the region, the pioneers had rapidly changed an ecosystem that took hundreds of thousands of years to develop. The consequences of drastically changing the landscape leave citizens today with a variety of environmental issues to solve. Lake Mahnomen, an iconic landmark of Menominee, Wisconsin, is not a natural lake, but a man-made reservoir.
When you are logging, you need a place you gotta move those logs, especially before the railroad was coming through. You need a place to hold the logs, process them, and get them to other metropolitan areas that are going to be purchasing that product from you. So if you create a mill pond, which is what it was, then you can float them right into the mill. They get up on there, and then they can be processed from logs into lumber. That was such a massive part of why, again, this area was advantageous for the logging industries. You have that pipeline.
After the lumber industry left Menominee, Lake Mahnomen was used for recreation. Citizens would swim, fish, and participate in many different activities on the lake. But now, Lake Mahnomen is home to a toxic blue-green algae.
It can cause skin rashes. There's a DNR employee jumped out of the boat to drag the boat in and was in the water up to about her knees and wound up with a pretty brutal rash on her skin. Of course, any animals that drink from the water during an algal bloom could suffer the same consequences to their health as to human health, so liver failure, skin irritation, things like that.
Lakes like Lake Mahnomen have become victim to blue-green algae due to reasons such as shallower water, warmer temperatures, and increased farming releasing excessive nutrients.
So when trees are taken down, you have less control over topsoil. When you increase farming, you get more chemical use, whether it's manufactured chemicals or natural chemical. Any imbalance can cause things to go out of whack, especially with really delicate water ecosystems. Those ecosystems developed over hundreds of thousands of years. We don't have that time to wait for our lake to not be green.
Across the U.S., logging has led to several environmental issues like soil erosion, disruption of water systems, habitat destruction, carbon emissions, and a loss of biodiversity. Logging also had a large impact on indigenous people when the pioneers arrived.
This area has always been occupied by different indigenous groups who are, of course, still here today. But the tribes that were here primarily were the Oneota and then the Dakota, Ho-Chunk, and Ojibwe. So this area was really a pass-through for many different tribes at different times. There were many thriving civilizations here with their own technologies.
Logging was not a lucrative venture for white settlers in Wisconsin until 1836, when the Menominee Nation was forced to forfeit most of their land in the region.
these ways of life were coming in and changing, but that also meant that the people who had been here were being forced out, or through different kinds of practices and treaties and things that were taking advantage of their place in their world. And when you dam a river system, you completely change its ecological makeup. This lake is one of, I think, the biggest remnants of that industry, which then completely affects the traditional foodways of Native people. That's an effect that is still felt today because that food is still sacred. The good thing is, of course, is that there are still people from the Dakota, Ojibwe, Ho-Chunk tribes in this area today still practicing their traditional ways, and that we just have to be better at recognizing and representing them. We even have mounds here in Wakanda Park that are a very physical reminder of who was here before, and their bodies are still here and part of the land. I definitely think that we have reaped the benefits, for better or for worse, in that we are now still on the land that is the traditional lands of the indigenous people that were here before. It affected the layout and landscape of our community, and how this area looks. I mean, just our historic buildings, the names of our streets, the names of the schools, the name of all of these things. Those men's names are stamped everywhere. So even if we don't know all of the effects they have, it's still there. The money that was invested in this community in some of these historic buildings that in no way could we recreate today has allowed us to benefit from those kinds of public service buildings that were created. We get to benefit from that and also have the responsibility of caring for them and keeping them going. Also, once the logging industry came through, the landscape was cleared for farming, which was a massive and still a massive part of the economic force in this area today. But we created infrastructure, we created the possibility for newer industries. And also, I think it's a benefit, hopefully, that a number of those different cultures who were part of the movement of the logging industry came here and stayed. As a historian, of course, being biased, I think that looking back, examining what we've done, why we've done it, and how we can move forward in a way that maybe is respectful and restorative will end up actually, in the end, making a great community for everyone.